Washington, D.C. The message to India, accordingly, is rethink the incalculable folly of going into the U.S.-India nuclear accord. The future offered to you under this is to be mauled, to be clobbered, to be an expendable kamikaze puppet and pawn against Pakistan, against China, against others. Who knows what else? It doesn't end. Don't do it. Time to pull back. There's an interesting essay, I've referred to it once or twice in the past. The Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, who's obviously a cut above the secretaries of state foreign affairs that we've got elsewhere in the world, wrote an article a couple of years ago reflecting on the Russian experience in World War I as an ally of the British against Germany. And, of course, this was getting mauled, getting clobbered, getting destroyed to a very significant degree. And Lavrov's response to this, the conclusion he draws from the analysis is, it's not wise to become the cat's paw or proxy of some other country, and you get sucked into fighting their battles instead of looking after your own. So basically Lavrov said, we're not looking for the kind of strategic alliances that we had before 1914, because those were a disaster. I would also add, in terms of this terrorist stuff, and this was pointed out back during the Moro assassination by my friend Giuseppe Zamberletti of Italy, who was the later became the essentially the Homeland Security minister in the Italian government. He had been an undersecretary in the Interior Ministry. He pointed out that the countries in Europe that had been most closely associated with the NATO structure, and these were the defeated powers, they were Germany and Italy, where they couldn't really resist the NATO implantation controlling large parts of their national life. But those two countries where NATO was most strongly present and tended to run wild were Germany, Italy, and that's where the terrorism was. That's where you had the Baader-Meinhof group and assassinations around that, under cover of that, and the Red Brigades, and a whole series of bombings and murders and so forth in Italy under other groups, many of these carried out actually by intelligence agencies. You compare that to France, right? De Gaulle had the good sense as a statesman of saying France will not welcome the NATO structure in that way. Terrorism was kept to a minimum. So that's the lesson for India. If you want to become that closely associated with the NATO command structure, your future will be, I'm sure, far worse than Germany with the Baader-Meinhof and Italy with the Red Brigades. In other words, once you get into this alliance with the U.S., which is not going to be popular, your public opinion will turn against it. How do you manage that public opinion? Well, you do it with terrorism, I'm afraid. And this is where the connections of the research and analysis wing, this infamous RAW, the guys who give you a raw deal with the CIA, with MI6, need to get attention. The Pakistani ISI, Inter-Services Intelligence, much demonized. How about the RAW? What about them? What do they do on the other side? So time for India to pull back from the brink of this incalculable folly and assert Indian national interest. Being a cat's paw for the U.S. is no future for a great nation that wants to be an important power in the world, right? Ask the various victims of the NATO structures back in the 70s and 80s. Now, other things about Pakistan. The destabilization of Pakistan revolves around the Supreme Court. And you'll remember back during the last days of General Musharraf, we had these amazing protests by lawyers. Now, when you see a demonstration of protest by lawyers, guys who normally don't get out of bed for less than 100 or 200 an hour or whatever it is over there, you have to watch out. Who's paying for this? Who is inspiring this? And I would like to know, of the people on the Pakistani Supreme Court, how many are Queen's Counsels accredited in London, as we have in so many other parts of the ex-British Empire, British Commonwealth of Nations, all the rest of this? In other words, how many of those guys are British agents? I think quite a few. Because what they've done, in the middle of a war, an amazing gesture, the Pakistani Supreme Court has said that the president of Pakistan does not enjoy immunity from prosecution, apparently during his time in office. And this is Zardari, right? This is Mr. 15%. We know this is not a great guy. Well, on the other hand, that's the only president they have. And look, you're getting into these Diem-style arguments. You say, well, he's corrupt. Let's get rid of him. You're back then to Diem, the Diemization of Pakistan. So the idea that the president would be attacked on the judicial plane while he's trying to contribute to a war, this makes no sense. The other thing is that the defense minister and the interior minister, the police minister, have had their immunity lifted. And apparently the interior minister has been indicted, and the defense minister told he can't leave the country. He can't go to international conferences. There's going to be one in the United Arab Emirates now in January. There's going to be an important conference focusing on Afghanistan and Pakistan. He can't go. He can't travel. Now, this is, of course, a destabilization of Pakistan, and it's not based on the fight against corruption. This is geopolitics. I see the hand of London in this because they would have the networks, or the U.S., and I'm sure the U.S. is equally part of it. Again, strategy is destroy the central government in Islamabad. So what better way? Indict the president, indict the interior minister, and take away the passport of the defense minister so he can't function. That's all coherent. Now, the author of a lot of this stuff is our dear friend Richard Holbrooke. You'll remember him, the mad bomber of Serbia, the guy who sat down with Slobodan Milosevic in the spring of 1999 and said, we have a human rights emergency, we're going to bomb you back into the Stone Age. And Milosevic was disagreeably surprised when he did that. So this guy's hated in much of the world, right, Richard Holbrooke. So he's on there with Charlie Rose, the foundation-funded journalist who obviously worships power and supports all kinds of lunatic imperialist adventures. So the conversation with between Charlie Rose and Holbrooke is very interesting. Charlie Rose asks Holbrooke, essentially, what's with the assassinations, covert operations, drones, snipers, kidnappings, and so forth inside Pakistan? And Holbrooke says, well, all I can say is we don't have any military stationed inside Pakistan. Now that, of course, doesn't say CIA, doesn't say contractors like Blackwater, and fudges any number of other things. The other thing that in the Pakistani press, The Dawn and others have noticed this. Here's another thing, though. Charlie Rose asks Holbrooke, and the Pakistani press didn't seem to have seen this. I would call this to their attention. He asks Holbrooke, you served as a young Foreign Service officer in Vietnam 40 years ago and more. What are the parallels? And Holbrooke interestingly says, well, the obvious parallel is the sanctuaries. The sanctuaries, in other words, there are places where the guerrilla forces operating in Afghanistan can, retire, they can refit, they can be protected, they can, organize their operations, have a base, and so forth. So Holbrooke says the bases during the Vietnam War, the sanctuaries were Cambodia, Laos, and North Vietnam. In this case, the sanctuary is Pakistan. And he says, well, in the Vietnam War, of course, the sanctuaries could be bombed and were bombed. I would also add they were also invaded. Cambodia and Laos were certainly bombed to kingdom come, and people remember that whole Kent State business back in 1970. It was the turn of Cambodia, and then in a year or two later, it was the turn of Laos. North Vietnam also flattened, clobbered, bombed. So he seems to be saying that Pakistan, he says, we can't bomb them, but of course, looks like he will bomb them. Back in a minute.